Fontaine's just around the corner in maybe 1 to 2 more months, and today I want to dive into my personal hype because I want to talk about Fontaine and stuff that I wish, personally, that they add in the game during the 4.x series. Now, here's the thing about videos like this. As much as I would love to say that don't get your hopes up or else you'll get disappointed, it's still nice to be excited about things. To look forward to stuff is such an underrated feeling of happiness, but never forget to temper your own expectations. Just like every good thing, too much is a bad thing. Genshin has their plans already laid out, and I highly doubt that they're going to have the leniency to adjust. So while this video is me talking about what I want to see from a writing perspective, if stuff doesn't go the way that they would in this video, then it is what it is, you know, there's no need to get pissy about that, especially if they're going to deliver something better. So let's first begin with the Archon Quest. My expectations for this Archon Quest is that it's relatively political, and the thing about that is political stuff in Genshin Impact doesn't have the best reputation considering just how potentially heavy the topics of Fontaine could be. Well, if it is going to take the political route. Now, the Seeds of Fontaine's story, at least, from what we know, has something to do with 2 major institutes that tackle the main thematic elements of Fontaine, which could be the cornerstone of the Archon Quest. One is the concept of technological advancement and innovation, which is exemplified by the Fontaine Research Institute of Kinetic Energy Engineering and other energy-based research facilities that are under this. This aspect of the story separates Fontaine from the rest of the nations as a land that's tethering the Industrial Revolution to the world of Teyvat. So what I want to see from Fontaine is a lot more gizmos and technology, or maybe even transportation similar to the Wave Rider. I think it'd be pretty cool to expand on that rumor that Fontaine had a monorail system that goes around the whole city, and while I know that's very unlikely considering the size of an open world game, a girl can hope, you know what I mean? I also wonder if they're going to actually cover the dangers of technological advancement, something that they're slowly covering with the hints of pollution and whatnot. I also hope that Fontaine expands on the theme of a black market of some sorts. You know how in steampunk games in cities with a lot of tech, we always have the alternative point where technology can be counterfeited in underground markets of some sorts? Think of Piltover and Zon from League of Legends Arcane, or when there's a contrast between the thriving upper city and then we have the questionable underground. Maybe they can take notes from Dorilo 6 from Honkai Star Rail, but there's a lot of ways that they can problematize technology in ways that the other nations haven't yet, especially since Fontaine seems to be at the very front of lifestyle improvements technological-wise. Which I hope that they do. I can't wait for them to tap into those ethical issues because the Industrial Revolution actually did have a lot of concerns, like safety, pollution, security of energy resources, and even just the legalities of the creations. Also, I want guns. I don't care what anyone says, I know that the Fatui have them, but I just want access to guns. I hope that we have guns and actual steampunk weaponry in the Archon Quest. But when we get into the nitty-gritty of everything, we also have the glaring institute of the judicial system, exemplified by the court of Fontaine. I hope that they actually expand on what makes the laws of Fontaine so complicated that even Yanfei can't completely articulate or bend them. I also hope that they cover the phenomenon of the Steambird, which is one of the most popular newsletters in the entirety of Fontaine, or maybe the entirety of Teyvat, considering that it's one of the few newsletters that are actually named, and the fact that it's controlled by the main authority of Fontaine, which is the Court of Fontaine. I actually want to see that relationship get tested around and wonder if they're going to cover something as deep as censorship, because most of the time when your form of mass media is controlled by authoritarian figures, something tends to be lost in translation, ergo conflicts of interests. I wonder if they're going to tackle something as realistic as that. Anyway, I also wonder if Fontaine and Connery are close to each other both symbolically and literally with the reveal of 4.x patches, considering that Connery is supposed to be around the area of Sumeru and the technological advancement vibes match for both of them. Though I am curious what the state of Fontaine was during the Cataclysm because it's revealed to us now that the previous Hydro Archon was also killed during that time. As for Harbinger choice, I'm still a big fan of Sandrone being the theoretical Harbinger we're going to face for this one, because her aesthetic of being a marionette and a tinkerer blends really well with the whole vibe of Fontaine. But honestly, any Harbinger would be fine. Arlecchino is my close second just because I got mind control to think she fences and I don't know why. But Sandrana being the main Harbinger for contention also carries a lot of expectations. Like hopefully a deeper insight into the Catherines, if they were ever revealed to be under the Fatui, or maybe just what she really is considering marionette was derived from a French term. So I'm curious what they're going to do with that, or maybe it's someone else altogether. Honestly, we couldn't tell right now considering there's like more than 5 of them. Maybe they bring back Tartaglia. Now I move on to my expectations for Focalors. Focalors is in a very fascinating position considering that she's technically a rehash of multiple archetypes already. One is that she's a god that's from 500 years ago that is technically replacing the old Archon. She's not part of the original 7. And we see how Fontaine changes under her rule, similar to how Inazuma changed under Ace. I've said my theories about Focalors and I had that guilty theory back then, but now I want to do an alternative headcanon or speculation for her character since that theory of her killing the previous Archon is very improbable. I really hope that Focalors' paranoia for her following the rules and Fontaine being a nation that is quote-unquote clean. Now, here's the thing that we currently know about theorizing on Focalors. She kind of has the same vibe Archon-wise as A, at least if we go with what little information we have of her. She's got this air of ignorance around her dialogue about her people having no sins, and there's led criticism towards her from the Chief Justice, if Booer's introduction and description is anything to go off on. She is also very afraid of the divine and doesn't want to make an enemy of them. My other wishful thinking is that for Focalors not to give her gnosis to the Fatui. I mean, I know that it's probably a given at this point, but I wish that if the gnosis trade were to happen, it's either because of a complete desperation or just an honest contract and trade. But I know that it's really unlikely for the gnosis not to be given to the Fatui. It's also really unlikely for her to not lose the gnosis because that means we'd have lingering plot lines. But still, I'm kind of hopeful for an outlier here. Now I want to discuss character design. I know this is going to be a pretty weird take since a lot of people have criticized Fontaine's current design pool as uninspired and lackluster, which I find a massive shame because suits, ties, and uniforms are my favorite aesthetic for character design. Yes, I am wholly biased, so I'm interested to see the frills and the ribbons and just the overall Great Gatsby vibe that is American. I think most of us are familiar with this vibe from anime, the English gentleman or the Victorian era frills shortened to fit in the aesthetic, or the strangely flamboyant French person. I don't know, there's a lot of weird European tropes in anime that I'm wondering if Genshin's going to fall into because they also like their anime tropes. Genshin's an anime game, so obviously they're going to adhere to certain trends, but come on Genshin, frills and long gowns with massive hats, parasols, and feathers? That'd be neat. Imagine the innovation you can pull off with that steampunk aesthetic. Whew. Anyway, exploration-wise, I wonder how they're going to capture the feel of the fictional romantic vibes or the je ne sais quoi of the French and the English cultures. Baroque is also a style that I hope to see since Genshin likes to mix and match time periods from a certain culture anyway to create their aesthetics for Tevat. I also wonder if they're going to do an amalgamation of that with the Baroque aesthetic that is prevalent in the 17th century. But after seeing Charlotte, Lynette, and Linnae, I think they're still going to go primarily for the suits and style aesthetic of the 1910s to the 1920s. But hey, I can keep my hopes up. At the very least, maybe the Baroque structure is going to be for the architecture of the place. And now we go on to the more subjective parts of this video, if the other parts of this video weren't self-fulfillment enough. Genshin's been due for several quality of life improvements, but we do need to talk about this from the perspective of an open world design. Now, I'm by no means someone that designs video games, and yes, I got mind controlled by seeing Honkai players get their quality of life for their lore, and I'm just kind of jealous. But the people that have defended Hoyoverse were kind of correct. It's harder to have distorted versions of cutscenes stay in a game that's not instance-based. This is also especially true for event-based games. Think about it like this. Events usually have places that are attached to them. Either it's by the design of the nation that is adjusted for that certain event. For example, the festival events have extra gimmicks to their respective location. The fact that those are gone already means that we're going to lose a massive aesthetic of that cutscene. Now, is there a way around this? Most likely, which is why I still advocate for putting in event quests permanently in the game, especially ones that have very, very major plot points. I still wish that they would have a compilation somewhere like the archive in which we get to see the dialogue and the actual information about the events that we missed, especially since most of the lore developments happen during event quests. I'm also an advocate for more Archon Quest interludes instead of temporary event quests, and just the overall adjustment to the quality of life of the existing permanent content. Spiral Abyss, Resin System, something that they'll never do and I've stopped hoping. Another quality of life change that I wish they would approve is the ability to change loadouts before going into the Spiral Abyss. While you're selecting characters to put into the Spiral Abyss, I wish that they had that. I am so upset that they don't have that. But now for my last thoughts about Fontaine, because Genshin's in a very weird state right now. If you look at any Genshin content, and even as a content creator or someone that consumes the media, it's kind of a fascinating push and pull from the audience and the 3.7, 3.6 patches recently. Fontaine has a lot of weight to carry for the next few patches, and it's because Genshin's constant dead patch, hype patch cycle requires the following nation to start off incredibly strong. Fontaine needs to be hyped up so it can not only retain the old players, but it can reel in the new ones. That's the important part. Genshin's not exactly a free passion project. Most players felt the burnout after the Sumeru series after the initial hype, but unlike the Inazuma to Sumeru transition, we now have another game to both play and compare Genshin to, which is weird. One of the biggest traits that Genshin had at the time of its release was that it was one of the fewest games that capitalized on the fact that the world needed escapism. But now that we have another game that's technically still under Hoyoverse that's also taking a slice of the cake, players are statistically going back and forth on the game and their interests change. Not all audiences that move to Honkai Star Rail are going to come back, and not all audiences who left Genshin Impact in the first place, regardless of HSR, are going to come back because of Fontaine. I know a lot of people are going to say that this is a separate phenomenon, but psychologically, audiences are horribly fickle with interests, and absence does not make the heart grow fonder. Genshin is numerically at its lowest point during these past few patches because of several factors. And though it's really successful monetization-wise because $1 million is $1 million, the regard towards the game's reputation has been compared constantly with Honkai Star Rail. The pattern of initial hype patches and then fickling interests is to be expected, but that doesn't mean there would always be a reconnaissance with a new nation. That's the danger of having that cycle in the first place. Fontaine needs to show diligent improvements and quality of life choices that the audience has demanded of since day one, because that's one way to remove burnout. The misconception in design is that more content means less burnout. No, that's not the case. The key to resolving burnout is to cater content that the audience wants and demands, as well as making niche changes based on the feedback so that the audiences feel there's a progression of some sort, not just constantly pumping out content. The Genshin crowd is at its most exhausted now. It also needs to address the changes that the audiences are asking for and introduce something new to the table. And I really hope that it does. I hope that Hoyoverse finds that needed balance because Genshin is, at its core, a really good game. The vastness of this game and its mechanics and feel as a hack and slasher are really good. Plus, its story is very fascinating, and I have high hopes for Fontaine. Tempering your expectations is perfectly fine, but if there's no hype at all, to the point that there's no motivation to play, then that's where you've gone off the deep end. But that's it for me today. A shorter video since I've been experimenting on things recently to try and get back to the groove of content creation, so stay tuned for that. And I want to know, comment below what you want Fontaine to have or to be, and what's your personal speculation for the game. Anyway, my name is Aster and thank you for chilling with me.